Hi, welcome to It's Your Book Reviews. Today I'm reviewing Feathers of the Fallen by Christopher de Monceux. I hope I said the name right. It looks French. This was self-published in 2018. So Feathers of the Fallen is mostly about corruption. The main character, Cross, is possessed by a demon, Saturnine, and he comes across a fallen angel, and Saturnine is looking to corrupt the angel, but then the angel gets saved by a god from another world, which I'll get into in a moment here, and this whole battle between these two worlds is kind of the focal point of the story and of the world. The whole setting, the world building is focused on these two entities being kind of at odds with each other. So first, wow, a story that combines Christianity and Asgard, Norse mythology. That is completely new to me. Maybe there's some others like that on the market, but I'm not aware of them. This book, this idea of combining those two religions or beliefs is very unique in my opinion, and it was very refreshing to read something like that. It was very fun. The voice or voices and the dialogue or dialogues were definitely very engaging and distinct. So, big spoiler, turn it off if you don't want to hear this. Cross is Uriel. I did not see that coming at all. That was really cool. Now I want to go back and reread and see how he experiences his time with Eva when Uriel is at the forefront of the consciousness. The characters are well-rounded. They're three-dimensional. Every character has their weakness. Even Eva, who's this pure angel, she has her weaknesses too, and that really makes her interesting. So let's get into some of the things where the book could have used a little bit more tender loving care. We'll start with the point of view. The point of view, it felt in the first 18 pages like it was omniscient, and I'm sure the writer meant for it to be omniscient. But the tricky thing about omniscient point of view is that it's really hard to pull off if you're not a seasoned writer. And omniscient point of view is not the same thing as head hopping. And after a little while, after about the first 18 pages, it started to go very extremely into head hopping throughout the rest of the book. So where we were trying to be on top of everybody, where there should be a narrator who knows everything about everybody basically, instead we got to dwell in this person's head and that person's head, and within a paragraph even, not just from paragraph to paragraph or scene to scene or section to section or chapter to chapter. We got into the different characters within just several lines of narrative, and that is very much head hopping and very confusing to the reader at points of time sometimes. Now, when you have a book with somebody who is possessed and you have two consciousnesses inside one body, pulling off omniscient must be even harder, and the head hopping approach here makes this very difficult because we're not always clear. Are we now Cross or are we now Saturnine? So it gets a bit hard to track who knows what, who's aware of what, and when. I'm going to give you an example where you will be able to see how this is head hopping and not an all-knowing omniscient narrator. This is on page 58. It was no surprise that Cross was merely present in body alone. Either Saturnine directly pulled strings or just his influence remained was a matter of debate. I think the author meant to say whether, not either, so let me reread that. Actually, it was no surprise that Cross was merely present in body alone. Whether Saturnine directly pulled strings or just his influence remained was a matter of debate. Okay, so if this is an omniscient narrator, he shouldn't have to speculate whether it was this or that. He would know. So this clearly shows that the narrator is not omniscient. He does not know everything about everybody. Was the information that the omniscient or head-hopping point of view conveyed, was it necessary? No, absolutely not. This book would have done really well with just one or two, three tops point of views with a close third person point of view. And the less we head hop, the more we get drawn into the character and really feel for the character and get connected to the character. That way we get more invested in the story. Now this book would have done well with just Cross/Saturnine as a main point of view character, maybe Eva, probably Eva, and possibly Alaric. That would have been totally enough, and everything else that had been going on could have been presented in a way that still stuck to their points of views. So the rest was not really needed, and a lot of what was conveyed could have been conveyed through body language or dialogue, you know, the actual point of view characters observing the other characters. Let's talk about clarity. Clarity was more of an issue the first part of the book than the second part. So I'm only going to give you the larger examples because I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty, itty-bitty little things because that will just make this video way too long. There were some minor ones, but let's talk about the bigger ones. The biggest confusion in the book for me was the carnage in the city in the very beginning. So we don't immediately understand that an angel is falling, which is totally fine. But the whole carnage that was caused by this fall was confusing. So there's a steam aircraft that falls apart, or maybe there's an earthquake. We know later on that an angel has fallen and get to kind of know that her falling caused all of this. But aside from all that, what's creating so much destruction? So it seems that the destruction is massive, but we can't get a good sense of what's actually happening. So how did, even when it's explained, when we do learn that the angel has fallen, we don't get an explanation of how her fall made this much destruction. When I imagine an angel falling, I imagine an isolated incident that is focused on one small part of an area. But I think she maybe smashed into this steamship, and then explosions happened, and then she fell to the ground and it caused an earthquake. I don't know. It's not entirely clear, so that part was quite confusing for me. I couldn't follow that entirely, and it frustrated me a little bit. Another bigger thing was the whole Saturnine coming back, getting his body back part. What bothered me there was that if Diva could so easily bring his body back, why didn't Saturnine go to her in the first place? Why did he do all the things he did for such a long time trying to get his body back? Why didn't he just see her and ask for her help? Or conversely, why didn't she approach him and offer her help? Clearly she loved him. Why wouldn't she do everything in her power immediately to bring him back if it was so easy for her? Because it did turn out in the book that it was super easy for her to bring Saturnine's body back. I mean, we don't see her go through whatever she goes through to bring it back, but it feels easy because she just goes to get it and then she comes back with it. The next thing that's a bigger clarity issue is the whole war peace situation between the two kingdoms, or the two god realms, whatever you want to call it. So heaven is essentially at war with the Norse gods, and they have a peace treaty. Their relationship is shaky, and the whole thing is not really entirely clear until much later in the book. So when this becomes muggy is when Odin gets upset about the death of the two Valkyrs, and so the two Valkyrs that were with Alaric when he tried to save the angel. And Odin says the pact between Asgard and heaven relies heavily upon a vow of non-aggression. So at that point in the book, when we don't know any details yet, it's very confusing, because if this pact is between only Asgard and heaven, then why does it matter whether they're aggressive towards creatures from hell? That's the main question that I asked myself for a very long time in the book. Why is if they say Asgard and heaven are in this peace treaty, why does it matter how creatures of hell and those from Asgard treat each other? And it takes about half a book to get to that answer, and that's a bit too long to clear that up for the reader, in my opinion. So finally, the last thing of clarity that I'm going to mention, that's a bigger issue because it's kind of a throughout thing, is it's not always clear who speaks. Okay, let me give you an example. It's on page 262, and I'm going to read this from the book because it's a longer passage. Eva, you are looking positively radiant today, the younger Swenson said, playing at some courtesy. Humanity agrees with you. Eva took the compliment as best she could and sipped a glass of refreshing coconut juice. I must apologize to you for stories I have told about my father and yourself. They were off color and lewd, and I hadn't meant for anyone to hear save for my less than savory companions. Alaric knew the apology was not only a false one, but a lie as well. So, I think Alaric is saying this. I'm not sure because when I read it, that was a long time ago I read it, but I think based on the saying Alaric knew the apologies was not only a false one, but a lie as well, I'm assuming it's Alaric saying it. However, this dialogue comes right after an action tag from Eva. Eva took the compliment as best she could and sipped a glass of refreshing coconut juice. There is no paragraph break. So when we write dialogue, you use action tags and dialogue tags to identify the dialogue. So when an action tag like that of Eva sipping her whatever she was drinking is right next to a piece of dialogue without a paragraph break, then the reader assumes that she's saying what is in the dialogue following her action. So the dialogue tags, the action tags, and the formatting help the reader figure out who is saying what. And this was an issue, a smaller issue, but it was throughout the whole book. It was not always entirely clear who was speaking. So let's move on to consistency and character. There's a small inconsistency with Alaric and how he feels. I'm going to go over that really quick because that was just one section in the book. First, Alaric doesn't feel he should have to give up his bed for the angel. Then he gets dressed, as his nakedness seems to make Eva uncomfortable. Then he is adamant that it's not proper for him to join her on his bed. And then he joins her anyway because she insists, and then he leaves her when she's asleep. And so this makes Alaric look or appear very indecisive and unsteady in his opinions. Other characters at times also display this forth and back in their thinking, and it feels as if the author couldn't decide or wasn't sure what he wanted his characters to feel or think, or which decisions he wanted his characters to make in the end. But let's move on to the bigger character inconsistency issue that I have, and that is with Eva. She is a wonderful character. She's very well rounded, but she does have some major inconsistencies. So let's take a look at that. So one of the inconsistencies with Eva is how much she knows about the world and how innocent she is and how she reacts to that. So for example, on page 168, the good grace of Cross had prevailed just long enough for her to escape Saturnine's lustful intentions. And this is from the point of view of Eva, but Eva doesn't know what lustful means. She is just starting to discover her own desire, and she doesn't understand anyone else's. This word, by all intents and purposes, should be foreign to her, as should its meaning. Then again, on page 277, her words, Freyr's words, purred, but Eva was still rusty with both sarcasm and sexual innuendo. Now, Eva cannot be rusty about something that she never learned or got to know or got to understand. So rusty refers to something that you were once good or knowledgeable in, but over time you have kind of neglected that skill or knowledge, and so you got rusty. So this should have read more like, but Eva was still ignorant of both sarcasm and sexual innuendo. Then she overhears Theo and Sylvie in their discussion about their love and this whole betrayal thing between those two and Brunhild, and she has a rather extreme reaction to that. Sure, Eva is innocent and she is rash with her feelings and reactions, but even for her, I found the reaction to Theo and Sylvie's love a bit over the top. Let me explain. So first of all, she doesn't know what exactly happened between them. So to consider it perverse is far-fetched, and that's what she says. She considers it perverse. All she knows is that they were in love. And then just the way Theo stands and the sound of his voice make her angry. So angry that she feels the urge to gut him. This is coming from a pure innocent angel. She feels the urge to gut him just from the way he stands and speaks, which in all honesty wasn't that terrible. It was a normal fight between one's lovers, one of them feeling betrayed because she was. So that seems very contradictory to her gentle nature. So then Theo asks Sylvie for some time to work through his feelings, saying that he never meant to hurt her and that he can't bear the pain in her eyes, and that causes Eva to feel outraged. She considered his earlier behavior poor manner and squirrely demeanor, although before that she considered it perverse. But now, because he asked for time on the matter and can't look Sylvie in the eyes, Eva positively, this is quote unquote, positively hated him. So that's quite jumping the gun for an innocent, good-natured angel in my eyes. And then 6 pages later, Eva contradicts her own values. She says, if love could be so beautiful and wonderful a thing, then why should the notion of their strange affection be any different? And yet in the same breath, it says, an absolute distaste began to dwell in her mind and further darken her thoughts of Theodoric. She considers him a predator, a villain, and a carnal abductor. So you can see where the contradictions there are in her character, in her line of thinking, in her internal reactions. We need more consistency here for Eva. A couple of examples for some general inconsistencies. When they talk about, so when Eva gets scared by some person, creature, what have you, that she encounters in the gardens, she talks to Alaric about it, and she describes the person who scared her, and Thor and Freya are there as well, and they're listening to the description. And it says, all at once, both Alaric and Thor deduced who among those in Asgard this creature must be. But they were careful not to speak his name. And then Eva inquires whether they know such a man, and then Alaric asks Thor if this could be the work of this mischief maker. And then it says, Thor quickly came to the same answer that Alaric had already arrived at. But they'd already both deduced who it was, or who it might be, just moments before. So when he comes to this answer, it seems like a double whammy. Like they came to this answer almost immediately, and then they think about it a little bit, and then they come to the answer again. And then Thor says, she describes Loki. So why were they careful not to speak his name moments earlier when he then just goes ahead and speaks it anyway? So that's one inconsistency. And then another example for a general inconsistency is when Saturnine says something about Hakon, who is Loki's son. He says, it was not easy to convince a boy so young to subscribe to my ideals. He was utterly devoted to both his parents and his captivity. But then, about one paragraph-ish later, Saturnine says, Hakon was so resentful that mommy and daddy would not let him out to play. What happened to being devoted to his parents and his captivity? And he says, I offered him a great many things, if only he does what I asked of him. Naturally, he did all he could to escape. What happened to, it was not easy to convince a boy so young to subscribe to his ideals. So these inconsistencies pop up here and there, and they can confuse a reader, and they can take a reader out of the story. Okay, let's move on to world building. So if I were coaching this book, I would have definitely flagged the Earth Midgard, what should I call it? Setting, explanation, description, or lack thereof. So maybe I'm not up fully on Norse mythology, but as far as I know, Midgard is Earth from a Norse mythology point of view. But in this world, it's not. And that was confusing because that was not explained, and that didn't really get clear until much, much later in the book. So when it's first mentioned, Gondel says she'll go either to Earth or Midgard. That's very confusing if the reader is like me, thinking Midgard is Earth. And not until Odin mentions the same distinction is it that I begin to understand that Earth is the place in this book and in this fantasy world building, this setting here, is that Earth is between heaven and hell, and then Midgard is between Asgard and their underworld, whose name I don't remember right now. Is it Jotunheim? No, it's not Jotunheim. I don't know. Whatever. But it's between those two. So they're like two separate worlds with 3 levels. And so we have heaven, Asgard, kind of on the same level. And then we have Earth and Midgard kind of on the same level. And then we have hell and Norse's type of hell. And humans live both on Earth and in Midgard. And that distinction was not very clear from the start. It actually took quite some time for the reader to begin to understand that that distinction was there. And one other thing about world building, angels are genderless, which is fantastic. That's great. But what about fallen angels? So all the fallen angels we encounter in this book seem to have a gender, and they're mostly male. I think they might all be male. I think all the female demons are not exactly fallen angels. They're children of the fallen angels, but maybe I remember wrong. But anyway, so are they male because they decided to be male, or is it different with fallen angels? That part is never addressed in the book, so I can't even give you an answer. Moving on to believability. It feels like this book is taking advantage of some convenient plot devices that are only there to move the plot into a certain direction, but they don't necessarily make sense. And so the reader has to have a lot of suspension of disbelief, and in my opinion, this book asks a bit too much of that. So let me give you a couple of examples. When Thor meets Eva and she tells him that Alaric instructed her to wait in the garden, Thor has no idea who Alaric is. He doesn't ask which Alaric, as in this is a common name, which one do you mean? But he asks, who is Alaric? And then as the reader, I could not believe that the mighty Thor had never heard of Brynhild's former husband, Brynhild, who is the head of the Valkyries, the captain of the Valkyries. She's the captain of the Valkyries. And so then it turns out in conversation that he does actually know Alaric, and not only does he know him, but he seems to know him really well, because only moments later he calls him that scoundrel. And then he says, Alaric is a good man, a touch stoic and glum for my tastes, but a fine lad all the same. So if you knew him this well, this should have come to mind the moment that Eva mentioned Alaric. And I understand that the purpose of this whole initial ignorance on Thor's part was for Eva to get the opportunity to call Alaric her lover, and moving the story forward with that kind of direction, but that could have been accomplished another way. Example number 2. So Calidora tries to, I believe she's Lucifer's daughter, she tries to flee, but once her Hellgate opens, she takes the time to grab a weapon instead of just taking Brynhild and jumping in like she does in the end anyway. This delay gives her foes time to storm in, and in turn, it accomplishes that Theo gets hit by the weapon that Calidora went to fetch. But we still don't know why she went to fetch it in the first place instead of just jumping into the Hellgate. She was trying to get away. Why did she grab a weapon? Theo wasn't there yet. So she could have just gotten away without having to do any of the fighting. So I'm not quite seeing the sense, except for the for it being a plot device to cause Theo's potential death and create some extra drama when he yet lives. So that also could have been accomplished a different way. It could have been written in a more dramatic way where she had no choice but to grab the weapon, and not shown if we weren't shown that she had all this time to get away. You know, we needed to create some more tension, some more conflict there before she could get away to make this believable. And lastly, I'll give you one more example for what feels like a plot convenience, and this is when Sylvie returns miraculously from the dead. Sure, her return caused all of the following things to happen. It was like a cascading domino effect, and you know, Brunhild's capture and all the stuff that happens towards the end, but that could have been accomplished another way as well. Even her family thought that was odd that she just returned, because just like that, because the goddess of the underworld, as they say, clings to her souls so tightly. So this is huge in the realm of believability issue. And alternatively, Sylvie could have been never dead in the first place. You know, the whole love triangle could have still played out just from a different angle. So I think having her return from the dead under such unbelieving circumstances that even the characters doubted and questioned was not maybe the best way to do that. Finally, let's talk about the end of the book. There's just one disappointment I have for the end, and that's that we never actually learn what Saturnine's plans with Brunhild were. And that makes the whole final part of the book feel kind of pointless because they abduct her. And so that does not really offer reader satisfaction. Overall, this book was in great need of some more copy editing and proofreading for sure. There were definite issues with apostrophes and then versus then, you know, with the A and the E, as well as some repeats and sometimes an overuse of adverbs, lots of typos, and stuff like that. A cleanup of the point of view and some sentence level clarity would have greatly reduced the word count on the story and not lost any impact on the story itself. It actually would have made it much stronger for it. So there you have it. This is Feathers of the Fallen. I will give this book 3 stars. I really thoroughly enjoyed the premise of this story. It was well written in some regards and needed some help in other regards, but I did really enjoy it, and so I will be giving it 3 stars. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.